Everyone has been at this for about 30 years, and I think we've failed. Hysteresis. Dictionary definition of which is the phenomenon in which the value of a physical property lags behind changes in the effect causing it. When magnetic induction lags behind the magnetizing force. Right. In this video, I'm going to take you through this new process of not only sampling, but a different way of working. I'm going to walk you through the backstory, the R&D that went into it, how we've housed it in a GUI, and what all those knobs and buttons do, whilst also talking to you about this new workflow.
You say you were a musician?
Yeah, I'm a musician, yeah. Saxophonist.
Soprano and alto.
Soprano and alto, very nice. After this video airs, we're going to be jumping over to my channel for an AMA. And if you're joining us live, grab a couple of beers. The address is down below. If you're not joining us live, I'm sure it's going to be a lot of fun anyway, and a lot of questions that will hopefully be answered. So what is hysteresis? Well, in the context of what we're doing, it's literally the sound of hysteria, not hysterical musicians, but the faster you get people to play stuff, the less together they are. It becomes more of a blur as they're struggling to hit all of those notes. It doesn't stay together like what it really sounds like is this. Reach, or what I like to call reach and rub. The further away notes are, the harder they are to get to. You get a sense of this thickening of the sound when the notes aren't as perfect as they move to them and then do all sorts of hacks, sliding into the note, arriving to it late, or indeed colouring with vibrato. And just asking them to ignore each other, I think this in itself is something that would be impossible to do with samples. The problem with sampling, particularly if it's articulation-based, virtual instruments, stuff that behaves itself and plays as you'd expect it. The problem with this is, in order to create those, you are asking players to play something incredibly simple, which means they're really together, which is fine if you're playing simple stuff back with those samples, like pads or repeated ostinati, that kind of stuff. But the minute you start introducing complexity, say speed, stuff that's articulate, it just ceases sounding human because it's too together, and it wouldn't be in nature. So it all started on a series that I actually walked off. It's since become a huge franchise, and I'm full of regret. But I did some experiments, just getting musicians to play a motif, but to totally ignore each other. When I mapped that across the keyboard and basically whacked my sustain pedal down, dramatic in a very unusual sense. I was also working on a series called Home, and again this is probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and I really wanted to work with Alice Allen, who's an amazing cellist, and I thought, well, is there a way of recording her with just a few what we've now called gestures, just changes in notes within a key that makes it feel like we've got a trio or quartet of cellos? And that kind of blew my mind because it felt like I was writing with someone interpreting as I went. It became a conversation, not a series of key-based instructions. And finally, those amazing arrangements of Conrad Pope, or his orchestrations rather, and being able to create that with samples. I worked on a massive Alien game and Jerry Goldsmith's blurry, silky runs, impossible to play by design, particularly something like, I don't know, Hedwig's theme, where Mr. Pope and Mr. Williams know that it will fall to pieces, but in a way that's beautiful. So I did some experimentation and some R&D sessions, and this is what I came up with. And it's interesting because I thought it would be fun to have a release trigger, which is great if you're playing in time, but kind of works. It gets a bit messy there. So that was a part of an R&D process. We also took the very basic idea I had of Alice's cello to see if we could make that work with an entire string section. And the results were spellbinding and are going to become the raw materials of the next free vault. So keep your eyes out for that one. Become a member. Membership is free and it affords you the rewards of all of these amazing free vaults that we're going to be putting out. So here's the environment we've packed all of this stuff into. Starting with our browser, you get in and out of it like that, or indeed by loading something and double clicking. You see on our left here, we have the 3 forms of expressions and Crowhill Selects, which is full of lovely surprises for you by the world-class Crowhill team. So let's launch Train Station. You'll hear there that most of the notes are gesturing. But there will be times when we want more control over these gesticulations. So there's a little function called velocity, and look what happens here. So no gestures, but a lovely natural motion, so you don't need to use your expression or your modulation. However, if I play, say, this A up here a bit louder, and you'll notice there's a little indicator to tell you when you're below the threshold and above it, using velocity to trigger the gesture. What's great about this is it means that you can move around a lot more and then determine when gestures form. It's really about a conversation. You're listening to how these things change, you know which chords you're going to, but you're responding to how they're interpreting your notes, and it's a really exciting new way of working. On from here, you can also just ping yourself along to the next preset. We've got our general tuning here and our volume here. So this is the VU meter. So you can see it, but go, why can't I hear it? And here's your volume, which is just a simple up and downy, as is the tune. Moving on to our microphone positions. We've spoken to so many composers about what they wanted from a mixer. We don't like having lots of stuff on our hard drives that we don't use, and this seemed to be the consensus, that it was a close mic. I think each desk had one, so a desk is 2 people, each desk had 1 mic on, and it's a mix of that, just solo. A big favourite of most composers is the wide. Now this is a combination of tree and outriggers. And you'll notice immediately that it's a warmer, wider and more diffused sound. And finally, the ambient submix, which basically it's mics recording the room, not the musicians, and this signal's great for surrounds. These are a group of spectacular musicians playing in the all-new Assumption Hall in Glasgow. Just absolutely stunning space, really good. I would say it's halfway between Abbey Road 2 and Air Studios, that kind of controlled ambience. So I'm just going to show you my favourite mix for stuff like this. It's to take the wide up and the ambient just a bit dipped. Onto the reverb section, the bypass button here, and then you've got some different algorithms to toggle between here. The size determines the length of decay, the reflection determines the start of the reverb to kind of imitate early reflections in a room, and the mix mixes between 100% reverb, 50% reverb and dry, 100% dry. My favourite reverb is called Splosh, which is my favoured kind of, it's about halfway between a chamber and a massive hall. I like to put plenty on, basically when writing for film, when the speakers go behind the perforated screen of a cinema, it loses all sorts of top end, and when you lose top end, the first thing to disappear is reverb. Also, you know, stuff like dialogue and room tone just kills your top end. So I mix super wet for broadcast and exhibition, and then for albums tend to dry it up a little bit. So this is my preferred setting. Now this lock to the right basically locks the settings between the presets. So if we go to this preset here, you'll see that it changes back to the original chamber setting. These have all been, again, tailor-made to suit the preset. If I lock this, go crazy, and then go back there, it stays the same. And finally, we have an absolutely stunning effect, which is glisten, which is where it moves up in octaves as it decays. This absolutely beguiling effect. Just get us back to Splosh. The EQ section, frequencies tailor-made to suit strings. And not too extreme, just that kind of right amount of, if you really want to push that bottom end. Again, perfectly tailor-made for orchestral. And then if you up the slope, gets a little bit more filtery. Timbre with the gestures. This is just a filter effect that makes it sound like they're digging in more. Controllable from your modulation wheel or CC1, and then CC11 is just expression, which is it sounds very natural. Doesn't sound like you're moving the reverb up and down with your expression controller. So most of the demonstrations I've done thus far online have been two-handed, to go, you know, this is a writing tool. It's for composition, for you to react and have a conversation with musicians. But the timbre and expression controls are really a way of you tempering the gestures so that you can change notes without that kind of sucking effect. Gestures are designed to work within a set key or mode. They load up default with the key of C, which is all the white notes, which means you can play beautiful major. or indeed A minor. Or D Dorian, Hollywood's favourite. And we've done a guide to the different modes within the user manual, so check that out in the appendices, I believe. But you can modulate, and indeed you can modulate on the fly. A lot of people have been saying, so it's a phrase library. It really isn't. It's a compositional tool. It isn't a virtual instrument. It isn't sampled from static, repeated notes. It's capturing the musicians being musicians. But you can see with all of these different features and approaches that it is a tool for composition, to feel and hear what it'll sound like with musicians whilst you're writing. And there's all sorts of exciting things that you can do with this shift. So I'm going to keep it in the key of E, but play an A minor chord. Provides all sorts of crazy dissonance. If we move along to the blurs, you'll see that something different happens here, and it's speed. With blurs, they are... And what you'll find is the timbre, in this respect, actually does crossfade between different dynamic layers. So you get these shimmery, all the way to much more of a dig in. I actually love combining the two of these together to give even more of a blur. You may also find that you want to dial back your splosh. Give you more of a kind of Bernard Herrmann sound. I requested that it didn't lock to host tempo because I think that there's all sorts of things you can do with this, whether you want it to feel like triplet phrases or 32nd phrases or 16th phrases. So I requested that we simply have a speed control, so whatever tempo you're working in, you can kind of jam with it and get it to a point where you feel it's appropriate for your piece. And we've set some maximums on this so that it doesn't create all sorts of horrible time stretchy stuff. I have to say it's a very good time algorithm that we've got in there. The other thing to look at is the arrows here. So if we do soft versus loud, it enables you to really jam around with the direction and flow of the blurs. I've also found the release section here incredibly useful. Got a little extreme, which is a lot of fun, all the way to it almost being a one-shot. So moving into this screen here, this is really high-end professionals asking for stuff that they use, little tricks of the trade to make it sound even more believable. For your convenience, there's a reversal of phase. So if you're having difficulty with things folding down to mono, that may help that. Also, we do this all the time when we want to track stuff up, is reverse the left and the right. So, and you can have all sorts of fun duplicating and reversing the stereo there. Stereo spread here. So if you imagine we've got a left and right signal, it's panned all the way or panned slightly in. What I like about that is that it really creates more of a blur because they're collapsed in. Mono filter basically puts your bottom end, let's try and find something a bit more sustained. Focuses your bass end into mono, which will make your mixes more efficient. And finally is room tone. which is continuous. There's just something very odd about nice big room, complete and utter vacuum of outer space, and you'll find by maybe adding one of these in, just maybe on one of your instances of murmurations, it doesn't feel like the soul and life force is being sucked out of the room. A couple of things I've probably scooched by on is smart load. What that does is only load the samples that you play to, again, keep the RAM load as low as humanly possible. I hope you'll find that this all-new plugin doesn't cause your computer too much distress. We've taken every step possible to make it not CPU heavy, but also with smart load, it'll mean that it'll take the RAM that it needs and no more. And moving on to Crow Hill selects, starting with these basic gestureless articulations. Absolutely stunning, and we've got those to match all the gesture types as well. Consordino. Sul point, which is a little bit more abrasive. It's a beautiful sul tasto. For me, that sul tasto is going to become my new writing patch because it does have a hairpin shape in it, which means that you don't have to wiggle around with that whilst you're writing. And I'll just take you through a couple more of the selects, which are basically gestures that have been mixed and matched so that you get a different outcome. My favourite one, I'm a sucker for this kind of sound, but if we go back to gestures and go to fragile, and I guess the one I have the most fun with is Starlings, which is it's just beguiling. But also the selects, so do investigate them. I'm going to be doing a video later in the month about how to get the best out of murmurations. And the reason I'm doing it later in the month is I need to understand this new way of working better. I've learned so much by doing just a couple of demos. And actually, if you go to our hub, which is linked down below, you can download those Logic files and indeed the MIDI files and also the audio to really have a look at what's going on. But also, even if you don't own murmurations, you can just load the audio MIDI file or the Logic file, whatever you prefer, up, and you'll be able to see what this is capable of. The Crow Hill philosophy is to be generous, be brilliant, and to listen. And we really, really do hope to be great listeners. And so if I'm hearing that you're struggling with anything or you need some features added, then we can talk about that later in the month. So when setting up this enterprise, I wanted to go back to the drawing board, back to that moment that changed my life forever, the moment when I sampled this charango. And what took me back there was not the charango itself, bless you, Gustavo Santaolalla, for that influence. It was the instruction I gave the player, my brother, and that was to make sure every note was different. And when thinking of this enterprise, Crow Hill, I thought, what if we could make every sample we make, every voice, sound different by design? Just a couple of tips from me that I've picked up is, I think it's good not to use it like a pad. Spreading the notes out, I think, is one of the better ways of dealing with these unexpected magical moments. And when you move to different chords or to different notes, try not to move in unison, if you know what I mean, all together. So here's an example. Let's do a bit of D Dorian. Writing on one of these, maybe a velocity version, and then just grabbing other gestures and over-tracking them. There's a composition called Fragile Cosmos. You'll see how I combine different gestures to draw us out of a single timbral mode. So for example, it starts with a lot of that fragile gesture, and then suddenly we pile a normal on where they're really playing out. And that's what I think really makes this library really special, is its dynamism, but also that it hopefully will free us up from the tyranny of the metronome. However, there's a lot of questions that have arisen about stuff like, how would you send this to an orchestrator? I do have answers for that. I have answers for how you click this up after writing your wonderful next opus. And these you can find on our Clips channel, which is listed below, well worth subscribing to, because we're going to put all sorts of stuff up that gets you the best out of your investment in our cause, which we really, really appreciate. Right, I'm going to go and grab a couple of beers and then settle in for an AMA, which is going to be live streamed. It's the first time I'm doing this, from my all new, quite ranty personal YouTube channel. Video link in the description down below, and even if you can't make it live, it'll probably be worth watching, because I probably would have had a few. Someone was going to join me but dropped out at the last minute because of illness, so I'm riding solo. Thanks so much for watching all of this video, and I hope it's just shed a bit of light on what we're trying to do and what's to come. And this channel is the beating heart of this entire enterprise, so subscriptions just make all the difference for us. See you soon, or see you over on my channel in a minute.